we will start probably about 10-15 minutes from now.
Okay.
No one else coming.
I haven't seen one yet.
All right.
Wow. I'm gonna tell people there's 17 people signed up to show up to the webinar, and I only have 16. I did start the session, by the way, guys. We're live. So yeah, we'll be starting about 10-15 minutes, guys.
Okay. I guess I'm gonna wait. And I'll stop.
You can.
Pin not entered.
That's you, right? Because I entered the pin.
Okay, yeah. Wait, no, you're in it.
Yeah, so. Yeah, alright, you're muted. I don't know why I'm getting access to that. You want to hit your speakers, man? Wait, let's put it up here.
Yeah, it's just normal.
Alright, let's get this set up and we will be ready to go. Alright.
Recording started?
I will in just a second. Alright, there we go. Alright, we're recording, and Steve Jakob is here presenting.
Is this your tic-tac-toe template thing?
What are you, what are we killing, Cam?
So, when your microphone's muted, mute your conference.
Yeah, with the speakers. I just did. Everything's muted. Hello, test.
Go to cell phone.
What? Okay. I think we're good here. Okay. So today's, this month's meetup is going to be presenting about networking. A couple of housekeeping things. It'd be nice if you are here in Austin, if you show up. We are going to be eating 3 pizzas today by ourselves. So it'd be great if you were in Austin, if you come to the meetup group. Also, if you're interested in starting a meetup group or in your local area, we are quite willing to help host on the meetup page and promote the GameStop meetup in that location if you want to try to start a meetup group in your location. Because I know we have a lot of overseas people, and clearly, if you're overseas, it would be very difficult to show up here in person. I think that's all I've got. If you have any suggestions, like I said, we're always looking for more presenters. It doesn't have to be just us here in the office presenting. You can also present remotely if you'd like as well. So if you're interested, hit me up on the meetup group or on the forums. I'm BlackCloakGS on the forums. All right. So we're going to be very muted. You guys have questions during the presentation or towards the end?
During fine.
Okay. So so everybody just kind of be respectful. I'll leave things unmuted. And Tan.
So this talk is on the networking commands that are on the release version of gameslad. As you may know, the nightly one has some extra commands that haven't made it out to the public yet. So we're just going to cover what's available for the public version today, which is basically just 2 commands, which let you essentially take a table that you've created and send that to a web server that you yourself have created, which today we'll be talking about how to actually set that up. There's 2 commands, network get table URL here, and there's one there, and then down here, there's the network send table to URL. Let's talk about the send one first. They're real pretty straightforward. You have the URL that is the web address that you're going to be sending. You have the table that you're going to be sending, and you have something new in GameSolid, which is this callback attribute. And this applies not only to these two network commands, but every single network command that gameslad will be implementing in the future. And the reason we have this callback attribute is because all the network commands are asynchronous, unlike other commands like animate or set attribute value or whatever. All those commands, when they run, they do their thing and then they continue on to the next command. With all the network commands, they run and then, but they don't actually complete execution. So for instance, what happens is the network send table to URL will take the table, send it to the URL, but it won't actually complete until it gets a response back from the URL saying, hey, I got your data. And how we tell you that a response will come back is from this callback attribute. So what happens is that when this command or any other network command is first run, the attribute that you set here, which is an integer attribute, and it can be on an actor, it can be on the game, whatever you want. It doesn't matter, just as long as it's a valid integer attribute. It's initialized to 0. If something goes wrong actually initializing the command, or if the command receives an error back to the server, that callback attribute will get set to -1. However, if the command comes back successfully from the server, the value will get set to 1. So what you should do is set up a rule saying, if game network post move is 1, then do something that says, hey, this has succeeded, and if it gets set to -1, then do something that says, hey, this message failed. And that's the same for every single network command that you see in the future for gameslad. So you need to kind of get used to the idea that even though the command is executed, until that callback attribute that you set gets set to 1 or -1, you never actually know that it's finished executing. So you have to basically your mindset about how to design the game, because things are not going to happen instantaneously. There's going to be a delay. And depending on what's going on the server side, it could be a delay or it could be very small, less than a second. So these two commands, basically they take your table, they convert it to JSON data, and they either, this command then sends it off to the server that you created. Its callback is expecting a response from the server that is a success or a fail return value, and Cam will show you that when we get to the server code, how that's done. Once it gets that response back, it sets the callback attribute to 1 or -1, depending on the return value, and then you can handle that. So it's pretty straightforward. There's not really much you can do with that. The get table command is very similar. You give the URL that you're going to be receiving the data from, the table that you want to stuff the data into, and again the callback attribute that's on all the network commands. This is a GET request to the server, sending whatever data that you're sending, and this. You can see here the string is hard-coded, but it doesn't have to be. You can stick variables or whatever in there, so you could potentially, have your game, actually call out the different addresses depending on what variables you set. Then it just waits for the response. Once this table is filled in, then the callback attribute will get set to 1 or -1, depending on the data coming back from the server was good. One thing to note, this is kind of a little annoyance at the moment, is that this get table from URL, the data that the server sends back has to have the same ID as the table that's being filled in. So, for instance, if game grid has ID 1, 2, 3, 4 in the actual XML data for your project, then the server needs to send back saying, hey, I'm sending back the table 1, 2, 3, 4. In the future, that will not be the case. I'm planning, in a few weeks to make some modifications to the code so that the server does not actually need to send back the same idea. The idea that the server sends back will essentially be ignored, and whatever data happens to be sent back will be put into this table. So that's sort of an improvement that will be coming up in the future. But for right now, you essentially have to know the idea ahead of time. The server has to know it when it sends back the table data from the networking table URL. That's kind of about it. You basically can either send data and you wait for the response and then do something when you get it back, or you make a request to a server to get data and then wait for the response to get it back here. Some caveats to note is that you can see here that on the base URL, there's, let me open up this in the expression editor. There's some extra data that can added here, adding extra parameters to here. I've noticed that if you don't put these parameters in, and you essentially, if this ended up like that, sometimes the URL, the message will not get through to the server, but it will if you add an extra backslash. I'm not a web guy per se, so can't be able to maybe go into more detail about why that's an issue. But if you find yourself communicating with the server and the server doesn't seem to be getting your messages, that's one thing you could try. It's just adding that extra backslash to the end of the URL. That's kind of the only catch, besides the whole fact that when you're doing a get, the server data has to have the same ID of the table that you put in your table field. So I think I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Jan now, because really for these two commands, the meet program for this stuff is actually being able to create your own server, and he's going to discuss how to do that. So, Jan.
All right. So we'll wait for the switch to happen.
Hello?
All right, there we go. Ooh. Woo! Full screen. All right. So, let's see here. So we're going to make tic-tac-toe. I intend to put these slides online at some point, so I'm explaining what tic-tac-toe is. Does anyone not get what tic-tac-toe is? All right. Okay. A helpful Wikipedia link included, just in case. Let's see here. So the game we're building features, we're creating the backend in PHP. I decided to start with that because that's apparently an option a lot of people want for PHP servers. It's not my favorite language, so it will probably not be the cleanest PHP code in the world, but it should be a good start. We're going to have the game backed by a MySQL database, and we'll be using a library that we've written called GSTablePHP. So, finding out what GSTablePHP is. If you have a look here, this is kind of what you have to do with the JSON data structure that gets sent to the server, or gets sent to the server from gameslad, and it's not a natural map to what the table does. For instance, if you take a look, you have to go to children, and then get the first thing in the children, properties, get the first thing in the properties, or the second thing, so the first thing properties, and then value. And that actually gets you the data for the row. And after that, you then have to parse the data, the type limited data, which happens to escape slashes if it needs to, if there's a slash inside the text, and then you have to reform the string after you're done, and I kind of got sick of it. So I decided to make a library called GSTablePHP, which we, after a few more fixes, I'm hoping to place on GitHub so that everyone can have access to it, and we will, over time, try to make versions of this library in different languages. All you do is you create the GSTable object, parse the JSON that comes back. When a of course, as per the spec, when the system sends the table to to your server, it encodes it inside the parameters. The parameters query parameter. So we parse the JSON, and that makes the GS table object ready to use. So to get the first row, you just get index 0, like you would with array, and to get the second column of the typo. Get the first column of the first row, you can do 0, and it would just return that. In this case, it would return the 1 that you were looking for. So you can do other things too. For instance, you can get the row by label if you have to label your tables. Get a column of data, and get the column by label. Both of these you can't actually edit the column of data and have it update. You just get the data there, which is helpful still. You can add a new row to the bottom of the table with a push, just like you would with an array. And it also will run validation to match the data types you define for the table. So for instance, if you said you wanted column 1 to be integers only, it would throw an exception if you tried to push in data that didn't have an integer for that first column. So back to making tic-tac-toe. There are a number of things you have to do when you're running a tic-tac-toe game. First, you have to figure out who the players are, get the basic info about the game, get the game board, all the actual moves that were made, figure out whether it's your turn. If it's your turn, actually, send the turn that the player makes, and then figure out also if the game is over and whether or not there was a winner. So, what we have in our game, our tic-tac-toe game, is we have a table set up called the game info table that gets you the game ID, player 1, the X player, the O player, the current player, and the winner's ID. Now, the idea behind using integer IDs is what we're setting up for in the future, but what we'll cover here is the possibility of hosting like a whole lot of tic-tac-toe games at once. And what you're doing is referencing people by ID rather than just sending them information. Now, this grid, the grid game table, which you set up in the project, represents the actual moves and the grid of this game, or the grid of the tic-tac-toe board. In this case, what we're going to do is we have one column that represents all the different moves, and one column that represents whether that square represents the winning move. We'll see why that happens later. To start with, what you're seeing is we were setting it up as the one. Even though tic-tac-toe is in a two-dimensional grid, we're going to treat it as a one-dimensional one. And it kind of makes things easier later because it makes it really easy. It makes it a lot less data to send, although we're really sending it the one digit for the index instead of saying, I'm in square 3 by 3, because I made my move 3. The other thing is it makes it easy to sync later with the method, with the way we set up this. There are going to be corresponding tables in the database that match that game table, match the table you saw. So for instance, there's a games table, and in the games table, it stores the game ID, the 2 players, whether there's a winner, and when the game was created. That way, eventually, if you wanted to, say, create a way for people to choose a game to join or resume an existing game, they can actually see, oh, this game was from November, okay, let's try that. You probably also want to do an updated ad so you can say when the last time someone made a move is. The next bit is moves, which shows you the game ID, the user that made the move, and what position they made it in. That makes it a really compact way of storing a whole tic-tac-toe game, because really it's just you list the moves people have made, and it lets you play the game later if you want. This one's taking a while to get sent over there. There we go. All right, so we got get game info client side. As Steve mentioned, all we're really doing is we have a network behavior that grabs data from the game and then shoves it into the game info table. And there's a callback attribute that I call network game info, which is used to track the status of the call. For the network functions, I believe it's 0 is One.
Zero is neutral, so it means the command has started.
Yeah.
One is return successfully, and the data is good.
Yeah.
Negative one means that there was an error, and something bad happened.
Okay. So in this case, what we're doing is we're just making a request to the game table. Now on my end, I have a PHP script, and I will show a little more about how the rest of the structure is. But the important thing you're getting from here is I've created a script that has a class for the tic-tac-toe that represents the tic-tac-toe game. So from the command line parameters, or the request parameters, if you look here, there's a game ID, and then it actually gets the game ID from an attribute in the game, and it sends that along, and it asks for the game info. So I have it set up where first off, I grab the set parameters game ID, and I create a new tic-tac-toe game. Now what this does is it actually, or tic-tac-toe object, and what it does is it grabs data for the game from the database. So what we have here is, you kind of have the idea is for this object, we set this as the current game ID, we make a connection to MySQL, and then we make the query for the game that matches the game ID. After that, we get the data back, and with that data, we set stuff up in this object later. So the next bit is after you create that game object, we have a big if statement in this file, and what it does is when it finds the point where it says, okay, the table parameters equals game info, then it's going to do some work. First off, earlier I showed you how GSTable makes these cards to make this theme. JSON object, a JSON string that represents the table. This also makes it a little bit easier to create one. So the first argument in GSTable represents how each column. So this is kind of how you're defining. It kind of matches how you define tables in GameStop. So the idea is you have a first column, one is an integer, and then each row we want a game ID, player ID, or two player IDs, current player, and a winner row. This represents all the rows. So columns and then rows. Then we need to set the table name to match the actual table in the game project. This is important because it won't actually update the table otherwise. We're hoping to change that, as you mentioned, but for now, this is what you need to do. And then the last bit is from the game object, we're grabbing player X, the player 0, the current player, and the winner, and we're populating that table. So what ends up happening is you've got the equivalent of a game salad table. Let's see if we can go back a couple. So the equivalent of this game salad table with all this information filled in. And so then that will, at the end of this code, which I'll show you the full code for, it just echoes back the object. There's a two, so when you call a first JSON method, there's also a toJSON method, which will take the GSTable object and create the JSON string that you need to game up. That's how you get the basic game server info. The next step is we want to set up the actual game grid that you're going to play on. And in this case, what I'm doing is I'm doing a loop through the game grid table, and for every cell, I'm going to spawn a new game box actor, and each actor will be placed onto the game or onto the scene using these two formulas here that kind of, if you go from 1 through 9, it will take that and it will automatically arrange them into a grid for you, which is nice and helpful. And then each grid item actor assigns itself to the current spawn index and changes the display based on the grid information. So I'll show you an individual game actor later, but the idea is each grid actor box is responsible for keeping an eye on its row in the game grid table. And so whenever we update that table, it'll automatically update what it displays for you. So next bit, we got to get great. So we've got the network code. This basically says whenever I'm done getting game data, because it's not, you can't see it here, but this is the attribute that the getting the game info table sets. Whenever this gets set to 1, then I actually get an updated set of game data for a game grid. And that updates the game grid table, which then automatically cascades and updates the actual grid you see. Now, that call over here, a get call to the server, which is game ID with the game grid, makes a call back to the PHP server. In this case, we're in the block that gets the one column with player moves and one player with one column for representing whether that square represents a winning square. And set the table to match. And then we have, what we do is we have the tic-tac-toe game grab the game state from the database. Now what this does is it actually gets us an array of the array of all the different moves. And then it loops through and sets the moves to match the table. The next loop actually figures, oh, if there's a winner to this game, then we're going to set the winner column to 1 so that we can see it later on the line. So the next step, we're waiting for it to refresh over here, is the user actually making a move. Now, each cell, each grid box has its own, has a copy of this rule. What happens is if the active cell, if this current cell is blank, that means it has 0 set for its move. And the player is the current player. If there is no winner, then you're allowed to click on it. And when you click on it, the things you see are basically what it does is if you click on it, in this case, when you lead, the idea is you don't actually choose your box until you lift your finger. But the idea is what happens is it'll record your move, which basically does a table write and updates that column or that row in the table to your player ID. Then it changes the game info to say the current player is now the other player, and then it signals, and then it sets another attribute that signals to the control program, hey, I want to send off my game state now. So in this case, on the control actor, we have something watching for the attribute for the attribute that the network tracking attribute for get game data to 100. Whenever it's set to 100, it goes, oh, okay, now I have to get more network, get the updated game info. So the idea is, once you get the game info, you will know. So now it's actually doing a. Oh wait, no, actually, it's not game info. Sorry. What this does is it posts data to tic-tac-toe for the updated game board. So in this case, we create another table object, parse the table that was sent to the server, and then from the tic-tac-toe game, we get the first column of the existing tic-tac-toe game, and then we update the game with the first column. We get the first column from the table sent to us, and then we update the game with those moves. The column will send an array of all the numbers that represent the grid. And when you're done, you send back status success, and that's what specifies to the server, hey, we're good, bye-bye.
That should be specified to the client, which is
to the client, yeah, to the client of the game, yeah. So, the next page here. So this is what happens when you run an update game. It loads games in the database, resets the move count, then it loops through your game grid, and what it does is it checks against what it knows about the game to see if your game, you're making an appropriate move. Like if suddenly the game, if the square has a different user ID than what the original game grid has, then it's going to call you a cheater. And otherwise, it'll actually insert that move into the database. So now the next trick is, how do you let the client, like, you've made your turn. Now, how do you know when your other players made their move? What we need to do is we kind of need to do a polling loop to make sure that you kind of hit the server every second to see, oh, has new move, has there an update? Is there an update? Is there an update? And so we do now. This is probably not the best way, but we'll change this for the final version I post for you. Right now we're doing a 1 second timer. The idea is every second we'll do the get game info request. Now if you remember, the get game info request has what the current player ID is. And so what happens is if it sees it's not you, then it
Test.
Hello? Test, okay, yeah. Do you hear you? So what happens is it keeps asking the server, hey, is there an update to the game and am I the current player? When it changes and when the other player makes their move, it swaps the current player, and then the next time you get the data, you find out, oh, you are the current player, and then it stops polling the server asking for updates. So how do we tell whether the game is over if there's a winner? Well, what happens is this is where we have the server do all the work of figuring out whether there's a winner. And what it does is it figures out, the server goes through all the different boxes to see if there's a win. If there is a win, when the game info returns, it tells you who the winner is. And then if there is no winner, you've made 9 moves and no one's won, then it'll return a -1, so you know there was no winner. And in either case, you can't make a move anymore. In the last bit, the game grid second column is set to, then after you've made your game info call, the game will make a game grid call. And if there's a winner, the game grid call will populate that win column with all the grids that are marked for a win, which will allow the grid box to update itself. There are a couple of resources. I'll post these back on the things as well. The quick link on how to enable PHP access to the code locally like we have. Place to download MySQL. A tool I find handy called SQL Pro that allows us to, it's a GUI for accessing MySQL to make it a lot nicer. And then we'll eventually have, this doesn't work yet, but eventually we will have gstables.php up and on our GitHub page so that you can go and grab a copy. And if you can make, it will probably make it an open source project, but if you end up making improvements, I think the normal GitHub thing, fork it, make your improvements, send them back to pull requests, and if you like them, you will help improve gameslad PHP. So, any questions before we get kind of into a demo of how it works and a little bit like a concrete example rather than a high-level overall overview?
So what happened to play together? Did that not work out well?
No, we're what that stuff is. That's what Steve was talking about in the earlier when he said that some stuff hasn't been released yet, and we're just still working out we're still working out the details with them. So that's will probably happen eventually, but right now because we've only released this to the public, that's why we're only talking about this.
Oh.
But since Playing Together is in beta and our implementation of it is still in nightly, we're not really working with it right now. Any other questions?
Have you worked with? I think Stormy Studios was working on this, like with MAMP and stuff like that. Has he worked with you at all with this?
No, this one I threw this together pretty much over the weekend. So this is all stuff we've done on our own.
Okay, and is that like I see that's like a book thing? Is that gonna be available on the website? I guess.
So what we'll probably do is the GS table code I'll put up as a project, and I'll probably put this tic-tac-toe project in an examples directory, and that'll be on GitHub. And then this presentation, I'll probably post a link to it in the meetup, in the meetup afterwards, in the meetup page. So what I've
Will you post the actual gameslad project?
Yes.
Yeah, we'll make sure we have links to either on the forums or the meetup page where you can go to get the project, the code, and the slides. Hopefully we'll have those maybe in about a day or so. A little longer because I've got another big project, but by the end of the week we should have it up. I'll try to get some of it up tomorrow or within a day, but like the good versions of stuff, you probably want to wait a week to check on them again. So any other questions?
If someone's crumpling paper near the mic, it's really distracting.
Didn't quite catch that. What was that again?
Someone's crumpling paper or ruffling something near the mic, it's really distracting.
Oh yes, if you don't want to have your audio on, feel free to mute yourselves or let me know and I'll mute you. But yeah, please try to keep extraneous sound noises in the room. Thank you.
Okay, let me see if I can get the All right, bigger font for everyone to see. What I've done is divide, so from the little snippets of code you saw before, what I've done is divide the code into 3 parts. This indexed PHP is kind of the default where everything enters and what actually gets called first when you make a call to the server. What it does is it checks if you have post data. Post data means that you're sending a table to the server, and then if it does, then it does one block. And otherwise, it assumes that you're trying to get a GET request, which means you're trying to get data from the server. If there is a post, we create the table, parse it, update the game like you saw before. If there was a problem doing any of that, we catch an exception, and then we send a status fail back, which we don't handle in the current example of the project, but what you do in a fuller project is go, oh, I've failed. I'm going to tell the user that the network request failed, or maybe try again, and then if after a certain number of times of failure, let the user know. Otherwise, if you're doing a GET, and what you get is based on the game ID that's sent, we create a tic-tac-toe game object, and then we grab we do something based on what you send as part of your table parameter. In this case, if you grab the game list, then this is not implemented in this project yet, but eventually this would allow you to go, oh, this is the list of games available to me. Up here, you've got the game info. You saw earlier, this sets up the table for getting the game. Game grid sets up the grid for the game. At the very end, what it does is it echoes GS table to JSON. And what that does is it takes all the updates you made to the table and then prints out the string representing the JSON for the table, so you don't have to form it yourself. Because if you've seen the documentation, the string isn't a straightforward like CSV file or a grid. It's kind of this complex structure that matches what we actually use under the hood, so it works a little bit faster for what we need. So that gives you that from the game project itself. So what I've done is I've got I think that's the right one, yeah. So I've got 2 actors I care about. I don't know what actor 1 actually does. That's the leftover. The MCP, and if any of you get the Tron reference, this is the controller for the game, the main game. This does the things like sets up the loop over the table and displays a lot of extra debug text. Oh wait, this is not the version. Ah, this is an old version. Okay. Oh, good thing I looked at that earlier. All right. So I need to get into my where is it? Taking chapter 2. Look there. That's better. All right, that's what I'm more expecting. So basically, grab data. This is a lot of the stuff I showed you before. The MPC is responsible for setting up the game grid, showing debug data, and doing all the network requests. And each grid box is responsible for, let's see here, this is grid index. Oh, so the first thing it does when it gets created is assigns itself to the grid spawn counter. And that's the, I think the index that's set during a spawn loop. So go over here. See, fresh, loaded, yeah, setup grid. So remember when I said I was iterating through all the rows, and then what I do is for each iteration I set this grid spawn counter, which I think counts from 1 to 9 basically. And what happens is when it spawns the actor, spawn and sets its own attribute to match the grid spawn counter, which is what it uses later for all the logic related to playing the game. So what happens when you hit, you've got a game. You saw the grid. I don't know if you can see it through the network or through the web card, but the grid came off one at a time. And so the idea is that was you can see the spawning action come up, and it was just forming each box. What we have is we set it now so that when the game starts up, it makes the call to that get info. So that's why we now know that the current game is game ID 100. Player 1 owes player 2. There is no winner. No winner right now. And then the current player's turn is 1. Also tells you your own player. So the idea is to see this actually play as a multiplayer game. What I'll do is open another copy and use Candidate Game Salad. Go over here, and if I hit play, it hits the network and thinks, oh, I'm player 1 too, so it's showing the same thing. What we want to do actually have this person, this player 2. So this works right. Player 2 is all white. They can't click on anything. Player 1 is on its turn, and as long as I have my touch or my mouse button down, it does this. As soon as I release, that's when I make my move. So there we go. It makes move. Now you notice the other side updated. Oh, great. Demo broke, of course. Okay, that's better. Okay. All right, so let's figure out what changed on that. When I refreshed it, it actually got the game. It's like, okay, now it's player 2's turn. So I hit player 2, player 1 update. Go over here. And so you can switch back and forth between the players now. Oh wait, better block this one. Too late. No, not that one. No, not that one. That's right. All right. X wins. To give you a sense of what's being sent back and forth over the wire. Let's see here. Local. That's the actual data being sent back when you make the game grid call, which is the call to get all the moves in the board. And this is kind of the format that a lot of that what GS table will help handle for you and makes it a little nicer. So it'll set all that up and shows you all the different moves. That is it. So it's got game grid. Info. So that gives you all the info. Like the various lines of the actual game in the narrative. Ta-da! Ta-da!
Any questions?
So how would you set up like just a random like ID? Is on that you? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So what do you mean? So what I'd probably do is actually create another call on the PHP side. So I'll show you this real quick. See if this works. Okay. So the idea is what I do is I make a screen where I would actually make a screen where you could say new game, and what would happen is it would make a call to the server. It would just make a call something like see here. I'm not sure if we're gonna get this right the first time, but the general idea is. So I would make a new game actor. In that if the actor touch is pressed, then get table from URL. And I did something like what was it? Something along those lines. So the idea is I would set up a game info table. And throw away one for now. And then after next step would be what we do. We probably do next is if the status attribute becomes 1. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to make a call to say I want a new game. Whenever it hits the 1, I would just change the main game scene. So change scene to gameplay, I guess. And let's just put the game button on here. So this is where it gets dicey because I'm not sure I'm going to do this part right. But give it a shot. So what I do is I would do. And then game list. So create a new tic-tac-toe game, and then come back and fill in all the data we want. So we're going to make sure what happens when we create a new tic-tac-toe game. This is going to be different. If game ID, then probably get to. So this is probably going to get a little more involved than I'd like. But the general idea is what I do. I'll just keep what you do. So the idea here is create a new row in So
Either way, I'm going to want
a database connection, so move that to the top.
So what I'm going to need
now, player ID. Change that to new game, check total, and
something like that. So the idea is I would send from here the player ID. So I just realized
you're not asking about a random number for the game. You want a random number for the player, don't you?
Oh. I thought that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
Oh.
So,
how would you generate
a random ID for a user?
I think there's
I'm not really big on speed. Essentially, what you have to do is when you create a new game, it kind of depends on whether you want the same player to be able to play multiple games. If you do, what you essentially have to do is you have to when you first run the game, you have to set up an attribute that is the player ID, and of course it'll be 0 at the start because they've never played the game before. So when they first talk to the server, what you do is, the first thing you do is instead of setting up a new game, you actually set the player ID. So you say, hey server, I'm a new player, I need an ID. The server would then return back with however it generates a unique ID, and I assume that would be a database of all IDs, and we would essentially create a new value that wasn't in there, and say, okay, hey you, your ID is now, 1, 2, 3. And then what you do is you simply save that attribute, save attribute behavior, and then the next time they play, they load that up and so as long as that attribute was saved, and they didn't actually delete the tic-tac-toe game from their device, they still have that player ID associated.
Otherwise, you have to do a lot more work.
Basically, you're governing the idea of sending login.
Yeah. If you wanted to make it so that they can move from device to device, then you'd have to have some sort of login system where they say, okay, hey, I'm player ABC, and my password is XYZ, and then the server would read that, and if that was a new player, they would assign them an ID, or it would return their ID for that particular name. So that's obviously much more complex. But that's the kind of things you can do.
You could use auto increment in a sequence.
Yeah, so that would be the idea.
And so that would be the idea. Instead of that, there would be new player, come over here, and then if it said new player, we're just going to ignore the fact that we're trying to make a new game. What you would do is, make new row, player table, and then turn row as part of. So then you'd probably do something like this. So. That. So that's kind of the idea. You'd make a new table, and when you insert the new player into the table, they would actually get back an ID that way. So in this case, you probably want to do something like,
or something like that. So they would send you their
username, and then you would insert them as a user.
I think what I was asking was,
right now we don't have any way to get some kind of unique ID off. Either a unique ID off the device.
Unfortunately, there's no way. Well, definitely not on Apple. There's no way to associate an ID with any.
So you'd have to have some sort of
login, or the player would essentially have to be associated with that device when you save their attribute on it.
So it's probably a feature expansion. You may want to be able to get
some kind of user
ID off
whatever network you're on, like
Game Circle
we can look into that. That's something we're planning on doing in the future, at least for Facebook.
Well, like what I was getting with like Game Circle and getting those. Well,
there's various ways you can generate initial login data, or you can make it anonymous. That's fine.
You can also do a number at the beginning of the game, say that's the attribute.
Well, you wouldn't want to do that.
Well, you wouldn't want to do that horizontally because there's no guarantee that two devices wouldn't generate the same. You always generate the ultimate ID on the server.
And that's why actually,
what Han's done here, where you just get your username, you'd actually probably want to include a password there as well, so that someone could, if you were Steve and you got it entered in there, and then I entered Steve, and I'd be getting your games, and you'd be getting when you're doing player creation, things like that, you have to like security and making sure that you can't get duplicate players, etc.
We're gonna bake the whole
database partners for turn of 3 here, so we can get this to work real quick.
The
idea is we want this to display text. Display the result value for the player ID table. Player ID table, row 1, column 1. Probably show nothing when we first start. And the idea would be, get player, name, law, and password equals law. Probably want to be able an ability to get a table on a post. Because you don't want the password to be in the string. So this one we now want to set the game.
Although
from what I understand, you should be able to use HTTPS in the URL as well as HTTPS.
No, you can, but the idea is what happens in the request is if you have it in the get part of the request, that gets sent in the URL. So only the HTTPS works when you do a post because that's in the body. The body's the different. So I believe I've got all the bits I need.
Yeah, but to that end, Han's actually sending the username and password as part of the URL itself. There's no reason why you couldn't actually shove those into a table and then send that securely across using HTTPS. You just send it to a raw URL, and then the URL would unpack the table, read the username and password, and then return the user ID.
Alright, so you can probably move on to something else while I do this. Everyone wants to really watch me do
Are there any other questions?
Any general questions?
Side tables
or whatnot?
Is the callback attribute where the data goes after retrieved?
No, callback is callback is just excuse me? Can you say it one more time?
What is the callback attribute?
Okay, so the callback attribute is an integer attribute that you create.
What happens is that
all the network commands are asynchronous, which means that they unlike animate or set an attribute or whatever, they don't actually complete when they're run. They start, but you don't actually know whether they complete or not successfully until that attribute is set to 1 or negative 1. So what happens is you call a send table to URL, and that attribute gets set to 0 initially, and then the table is turned into the JSON string and sent across the network, and then the game continues on executing behavior. What happens is that when the server gets the data and sends back, hey, I got the data, or I failed to get the data, that attribute will get set to 1 if it receives a success message, or negative 1 if it receives a fail message. And so you can make a rule that says, if the attribute is 1, then that means that the message succeeded and I can continue on with the game. If it was set to negative 1, something wrong happened, so you might want to do things like, the simplest thing to do would be to pop up an error message saying, I can't play this game anymore because I can't communicate with the server. Or you could do slightly more sophisticated things like you could have a repeat count, so you'd actually try to execute the send or the get multiple times until you just decide, if it fails 5 times in a row, then the network must be down, and you're just going to have to say the game's over, and you'll have to come back later.
So that's kind of how that works.
And you have to
trying to get your head around this because
this is a new system for gameslad where you have a command, and you don't actually know whether it's executed correctly or not until later. And it could be, several seconds later, depending on how slow the internet is,
or how much work the server
needs to do.
So that's kind of something you have
to wrap your head around because you're not going to be getting instant feedback. And you have to realize that the command has to execute it, and you kind of have to wait. So you can't, like, say, right after I send this table, I'm going to animate something saying, command completed successfully. Well, you can't do that immediately. What you have to do is you have to wait till that attribute gets set to 1, and then you execute the animation that says command succeeded successfully.
I think our in-app purchase.
In-app purchase is a similar kind of thing. I'm not exactly sure whether we had a callback.
There's you can do an in-app purchase. Underscore the in-app search item. So there's a change attribute, and that's the callback attribute. So the change attribute is a lot like the callback attribute.
And I should note that none of the network commands will run unless that callback attribute is set. If you leave the callback attribute out, you say, I don't care whether this command succeeded, I just want to run it. Well, you still have to set the callback attribute, otherwise the message will not get sent out to the server saying send table or get table. Some other things I just want to mention is performance. With all networking, the secret to fast performance is to send as little data as possible. As you saw from Tan's example there, and you can actually kind of see it in the background there. The JSON format has a lot of data, or a lot of text and stuff in there that isn't the actual data. There's a lot of overhead involved, and it takes time to parse all that out, to either create it or read it back in. or read it back in.
So basically, if you have like this huge table that you've got, and only a few fields are changing at any one time,
you actually might want to think about like breaking that table up into a lot of smaller tables, and just sending like one of the smaller tables out instead of this whole big table, because basically the less data you send, the better your performance is going to be. Actually, to that end, if you want to be on the sort of cutting edge of the network commands, in the nightly builds, there's actually some new commands that have been added. So there's send and get table row to URL, where you can just send a single row instead of the entire table. And there's also get and send attribute to URL, which just sends a single piece of attribute data to a URL. So if you're interested in kind of getting some of the newer features that should be coming up in the next release, you can get the nightly build, and there will be such
also, I want to mention that
a future expansion of this will have the option to send and receive the data as CSV data, so that it might not necessarily be as efficient on our side, but it's definitely cleaner on the server side. You don't have to parse as much as the hand wrote an entire library just to parse the JSON. So you don't have to do that if that's the choice. So that's an upcoming feature that will be added.
And then of course there's all the place
together stuff, which we'll be talking about as soon as we are legally able to.
Any other questions or comments or?
Making a network game
compared to making a single player game is exponentially harder. So you do have to kind of get used to things not going as smoothly as you would have liked
when you were
making your single player game. That's just part and parcel of the environment of network gaming. But
it can be very rewarding,
and of course you can social networking and being able to play with other people online is obviously very popular and can really add some oomph to your game. Get it out there, get more people playing it.
One of the things I was asking, importing images. Is that something that's coming up anytime soon?
Can you say that again? We couldn't quite get all that.
Importing images, PNG files. Is that something you're looking at implementing anytime soon?
Well, you already from the server.
Right now, the server is strictly text.
It's definitely
something we thought about. Basically, I should note that we actually started this code with the Plays Together code, and the Plays Together code can't send binary data over its network, and so that's the reason why we're not doing it right now. That is something that we may look to in the future, but it's not something that's going to happen, let's say, in the next few months.
That's something good for having avatars and advertising, etc.
Like avatars and avatars. We all raised a good feature. Unfortunately, we have some higher priorities that take precedence over it. It's definitely something on the radar for a future improvement in networking.
There's a lot of features
we want to add, but it's just,
we've only got so many people working
on things, so we're a little understaffed. We've got a list of things we want to make improvements for.
I heard there was another question on the line that I heard earlier.
Where are push notifications? Where are push notifications?
Sorry, say that again. Push notifications?
That's something we're going to add.
That's something we're going to add.
Well, let's see. So push notifications
are part of the Plays Together
system, or at least how we were going to implement it. Again, that's pending essentially until all that gets worked out. We are also looking at other push notification systems potentially, but nothing's been decided yet. It's something we definitely want to do. We're still working out kind of how we need to do it technically and what systems we're going to be using. It's something that'll probably come up and probably come up before the end of the year, I would think. But we get as far as I can get.
So, like, what's the difference between play together and just like a normal like server hoster? Like,
the deal with this thing is that you have to create your own server. So you're responsible for setting up your machine and keeping it running and all that. Play together is basically a service that does all that for you. So you don't have to worry about it. It handles all the database stuff. It handles all the parsing of the data on the back end. It also has a lot of nice features about keeping track of progress, keeping track of user IDs. It handles a lot of overhead. And we actually started the networking system for GameSlad using their system. We ran into some financial and legal issues with them, and that we are continuing to work out. But we are hoping to continue using their service sometime in the future. But we are reasonably confident that it will come to pass, that we will be able to use that. And that opens up a whole lot of new features and new commands that make networking a lot easier to make multiplayer games. But like I said, when all the issues with lawyers and whatnot get worked out, we'll let everybody know.
So we've got a basic version, assuming here that you press the button, you get a new player ID, which is player ID 3, and then I've readjusted the game to actually work with player ID 3. So. Now, what you'd end up doing instead is for change get player ID to actually access the database, try to see if there's a user, password matches, if not, create a new user, that kind of thing.
And that's something that the Play Together system would do for you. So it's basically it makes things easier on the client side. But yeah, for right now, you're responsible for writing your own server code and setting all that up.
Mm.
You do have the advantage though of basically. You can do anything on the server you want to. So I mean, you could have the server handle, make a massively multiplayer game if you really have the ambition to do it and the talent. Have the server handle hundreds of players playing a game simultaneously. If that's what you wanted to do. The sky's the limit. It's whatever you can code. But you do, of course, you do have to be able to code.
Mm.
Any other questions or comments or anything else?
How's WWC was like yesterday. How does that like affect you guys?
I watch lots of videos. And basically go back to college for a whole week while I absorb all the information. And then try to figure out maybe what affects me. I'll give you guys a know. I'm a lead software and lead developer, and my job is to basically wrangle that to make sure that the sideline is pretty well. I've watched so far the first 2 videos, and they're posting videos every day, and I've been trying to go through all the APIs and run all the things, all the various beta versions to make sure nothing breaks. So, apparently Yosemite is wonderful. I've seen people in having problems with audio not working, we've seen people with graphic glitches, so Yosemite definitely is not ready for prime time yet.
I've run it successfully with gameslad, but
it's beta 1, so we'll see.
And like I said, I'm still going through all the APIs,
making sure
something's
gonna
make it have to change anything
or whatnot.
There's a couple other interesting sessions down the way.
There's a session about purchase, surprisingly, that I'm gonna watch make sure they change anything else again on me.
On that.
On that.
Is there anything obvious from what you watched that we would want to either support or
right now,
no. But the problem is everything's been so high level. I keep watching more and more of the low level stuff, and then I'm trying to find things. Oh, it would be nice if you told me about that higher level. Like one example, we're not going to do this right now, but one of the examples is watching the State of the Union platform. They talked about a new joystick for iOS, which was not in the keynote at all. So that was kind of new to learn about.
There's some more stuff about
various cloud services and whatnot. I'm still waiting here more information on as the sessions come into fact. But basically, I haven't seen anything yet that would impact us. There's some interesting new features they're adding,
but
nothing that would immediately benefit us. Like I don't think any, I know we have some users who are using gameslad to do non-games, and there's some interesting technologies like Health Center and the home stuff that's coming in there, but I'm not really sure anything like that would really benefit users right now. Most of us are making games with this.
I've had success with Yosemite running gameslad, so I'm not sure what's going on with others.
Yeah. There's two of us.
Question about the XML.
Question about the XML.
You're
pulling out the IDs. Is there an editor you'd recommend for use on a Mac?
Sorry, what was that?
I noticed you're having to dig through the XML of the project files to get out the IDs.
Is there an XML editor?
Is there an XML editor you'd recommend for doing that?
In this case, I don't even use the full editor. What I do is I don't use an XML editor. I just use TextMate to look at the files. But if you saw what I did here, what I did was...
So I knew I was looking for
a table called player ID. And so I use the command line tool. Let me see if I can get this.
The center preference is the same here, too. You can change the size of the text on the chart.
I just use the grep.
I just use the grep command, which is a way to search through arbitrary text files for a given string you're looking for.
Right, so you just look for the name of the table and then the ID is just there.
Yeah,
That's pretty much all I'm doing with that.
I think
TextMate one of the standards on. You can also use TextMate to search the entire project.
Grep's probably faster.
Yeah, Grep's probably faster.
So if I'm inside
the directory and you're in TextMate, I can do mate.
That'll open that up.
That'll open that up, and then you can actually just go into
You just control it. You want to use
table.
You can look at the various tables.
You can look at the various tables.
And so that way I just know.
Okay, so the table I'm looking for is. Actually, we don't use the table. You just grab the name of the file and copy that.
But that tab requirement will be going away fairly soon, I think.
That's a reset
that's happening is actually a legacy holdover from the Place Together code. The way that was working is when the Place Together sent us table data.
The only way to know which table
it was sending is through the ID.
And so
that's the reason we're checking the ID there. But since you obviously in here you actually set the table in the first place, we don't actually need to do that anymore. And so that's essentially the bug that will be fixed soon.
What's it talking about? It said Code Wizard said there's going to be like a graphic overhaul.
We're talking about basically, we
pretty much rewrote the entire
code base for how it renders.
In a nutshell,
one of the other programmers, one of the engineers who's not here in this room, basically taking the entire system where all the code that renders and pretty much rewritten all the code. So you will see dramatic improvements in the amount of actors you can have on screen, and various effects you can do. We basically, what used to happen is every single, this is probably more technical if I want, but what used to happen is every actor was its own draw call in OpenGL, which has a lot of overhead, and now we've got it down to if everything can be batched together, it would be one draw call for your entire scene. We're also doing some things that we'll get into more detail with once we get everything finalized, but we're also taking your textures and trying to make them more optimized for memory usage and file system usage. So instead of relying on PNG, we're gonna take your PNGs and we're gonna try to pull out the most crucial part of the data. If there's repeat data, we'll pull that out and we'll tile it ourselves for you. We'll stick it in the most memory efficient way possible, so we can do the fewest amount of OpenGL calls and maximize the most amount of actors you can get on screen. So you'll be able to do things like Ikaruga, like bullet games will be very, very easy to do now. It won't bog down anymore. You have lots of actors doing things on the scenes. I think there's some people that like word games or something like that that might have a bunch of actors that have issues, performance, all that stuff should go away. The only thing we might have some issue with performance might be some physics, but you'll be able to render many, many hundred times, thousands of times faster than you can now, especially also in particles.
What about getting device information like the UDID number and things like that? So
yeah. So Apple has made a real big effort to make that all not available. iOS, you can no longer get the UDID of the device. You can no longer get the MAC address of the device. The only thing, and also, as you've seen, Apple's wonderful, crazily overly complicated page you have to answer questions about the advertisement ID. They won't even let you use any unique, even the advertisement ID cannot be used for anything but apps. So on iOS, there's almost literally no way to get a unique identifier for the device anymore. On Android, you can use the MAC address. I think there might be a way to get the actual device ID. But on iOS, Apple is very aggressive in making it sure that you cannot get anything like that off of the device.
So, as Facebook integration, I guess, like the Twitter integration, is it just gonna be for pros, I guess?
Yes, it's gonna be for pros.
Yes, it's gonna be for pros only. We're gonna start with posting because we probably start walking before we can run. So the simpler one is to post on Facebook because that seems to be the most demand one. We've done some research on doing Facebook login and using their SDK. So we have some of that work kind of been done, but we're going to start with posting first, and then we'll go from there and see what best fits our needs after that.
But yeah, we're going to start with pro only.
But yeah, we're going to start with pro only for posting to Facebook.
So like when they updated it, they Facebook kind of made sure you own, how do I say this? They kind of block you off unless you have permission. So is that going to affect it at all?
In mine on Android,
so we'll start with iOS, which is the easier device to deal with. Apple actually made it real easy. Apple's calls in your Facebook SDK are all in Apple and Cocoa. So as long as they put in a user ID in the settings for Facebook, then Apple will take care of permissions and all that good jazz. I think it might even prompt them to say, "Were you okay with this app taking Facebook, accessing your Facebook?" So Apple will handle all that for us. We're just going to use Apple's built-in framework for it. Android, thanks to the wonderful world of Android fragmentation, doesn't really have a shared behavior framework per se. Facebook does have an overly complicated SDK you can use, but I think we'll probably start with Android preferred method, which is they call a metadata with intent. So we will take your image and string that you want to post, and then let the user, if they have Facebook installed, hand that information off to the Facebook app to post.
On Android, it only works if the Facebook app is also on your Android device and running. Then it just basically does a cross app message.
communicate directly with the Facebook servers.
So it's a little awkward.
So it's a little awkward. But
And we may down the road.
And we may down the road, if Android becomes really hard to deal with, we may go ahead and implement Facebook SDK for Android. But we'll start simple. We'll start simple, make sure it works, and then we'll improve it as we go from there.
What's the story with the iOS simulator? When will that be working?
So this goes down to more an issue of research. Yeah, we need to get the viewer working on simulator. We unfortunately had to, we were going to fix it for the 11 release, but we ran out of time to fix it in time. It is on my docket to have someone take a look at it and get fixed sooner than later. But we're kind of balancing Windows resources with that. But yes, it is on our list to get fixed. Yes,
so much
stuff to do. Yes, we will get that fixed. I've noticed a lot of you guys do use simulator for viewers, so we'll work on getting that fixed sometime in the near future. Sooner than later.
We need to make a there's some issues with the Lua engine, the actual Lua code itself, not our Lua code, on the simulator that we have to work out. Plus, I'm sure there's other issues, or graphics and whatnot. But yeah.
I think I've gotten to the point where when you get you can log in or create a new player.
If we're watching during that time.
If we're watching during that time, then you kind of saw an idea of how it's done. If not,
it will be posted.
It will be posted. Yeah.
I recorded it, so it's okay. I recorded this whole thing.
We have a recording.
We have a recording too. On that note, I finally edited the first monthly meeting. Hopefully we'll get that posted once I can wrangle YouTube to let me post it, and then we'll try to get this up sometime soon as well.
But I did remember to record this time.
I did remember to record. Any other questions? Or do you have any more can to go through? Or
not here.
Oh.
Any more questions we can answer?
Any more questions we can answer? Or
chat about?
I had a quick question. Like, so what's the Windows 8 supposed to do exactly? Like, on like is it just like for the store, like on like PCs and stuff, or what does it do?
Yeah, our Windows 8 publishing target.
Yeah, our Windows 8 publishing target. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, it's for the Windows 8 store.
Yeah, it's for the Windows 8 store, app store. They're actual.
It's to allow you to create Windows 8 Metro app. So the new interface that they created for Windows 8 with the tiles and all that, it'll create apps for that. The engine is based on our HTML5 engine, so it won't have exactly the same characteristics as you would with other mobile platforms. But because the Windows 8 machines are a little beefier, it'll be sort of like what happens if you see a game on arcade and you're playing it on a desktop.
Speaking of arcade, like, go ahead. I'll let you go first. I've been talking a lot. Go ahead.
Cut out there. Hello?
Cut out there.
Hello?
Hello.
When are custom?
Kai heard the word custom.
Kai heard the word custom.
Custom fonts.
Okay.
That will probably happen
after we get all the rework of the rendering happening. We want to do the fonts right, and we don't want to put like a hack in. So we want to. The prerequisite for custom fonts is fixing the rendering system. Once that is in place, then we'll work on custom fonts.
I don't have a timetable.
I have so many things we're working on. I don't have a timetable. That's unfortunately. Once the rendering system is fixed, we can start talking about getting custom fonts in.
I talked to you before about display text, and you said that the font size can't be changed at runtime. Is that something that can be fixed or be able to do in the future, or is it just something that can never be done?
The font size on the display text?
I've got a pitch zoom system, so when I zoom in and out, the font increases and decreases. I'd like to be able to keep the font the same size. I can't do that at present because I'm being told at runtime you can't change the font.
Yeah, let me talk to
Yeah, let me talk to our graphics guy tomorrow, and I'll see if there's anything we can do as a side to kind of do that. I have to go look at the rendering code again. I'm not sure if there's anything that would have stopped us from doing it besides saying the value.
If I remember right, so don't take my word for this since I'm the web guy and not the engine guy, but if I remember the explanation, it's that it's expensive for us to draw the text, and so if you're trying to do a dynamic resize while you're running it, you'll see the text basically, it's like draw text, oh, we're going to do size, draw text again, and every time we draw that text, it's a bit of a hit.
You still have to do that. That's
Well,
how
currently the way we have it. I think it's the way it's arranged in the pipeline.
It's expensive either way when it matters. Because we used to do it every frame we'd recalculate, we'd redraw the text. Now we have at least a cache of it that doesn't change. So if you want to have it, probably the better way now, if you want to get worked around this, is to set the font point as high as you want it, and then scale the actor down. Because that will still look okay, and you're doing the exactly same thing as changing the font point.
Okay, that's interesting. I'll have a look at that, thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
When is the arcade going to be updated? Because I see, like, from, like, it's from a few years ago, some of these games and that are being featured.
So the featured game category, what happens is we actually don't have anyone right now that's actively curating the new games coming out. So a couple of things are going on. In between different tasks, we're working on an update to the arcade. So that's one, it'll run a little faster, and two, it will allow for things like a bigger screen for the game. And then the other thing is, we'll probably between ourselves and some help from the community start kicking out games to feature on the front page, other than the same 5 games we've seen for the last, I think, 4 years. So that's kind of the idea. It hasn't been updated because no one's in charge of updating it. And if you want to see the new games, you have to go to the latest community games drop down. We're hoping to change that soon so that you can actually see some real games show up. And we're also hoping to do an overhaul of the arcade, so for instance, it doesn't take like 3 seconds for the game to do. Yeah.
I had a question. You know that little spinny thing, like, you know, like when a page loads, is it possible, like, to edit that? Like,
Right now on the spin, you can edit it in the native app. That's the custom spinner. I think that's a pro only feature right now.
Yeah, I think it's pro feature.
We'll probably implement something similar for the arcade. Right now you can't. And it's probably when the new arcade launches, in order to try to get it out sooner, you would be able to. But over time, you would probably do the same thing. If you're a pro, you can change the spinny thing.
I was talking like the app on the phone, like, you know, it kind of has like between like loading pages, like let's just say on like an app. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Are you talking about that?
So in the app, it's the same thing. If you're a pro, you can update and change the spinning thing. The main thing is it's called the change custom spinner. The only thing is it will still spin. So you can't change it to do something else like animate differently, but you can change the image that spins.
Yeah, we have plans to do more with it. But right now we're kind of swamped with other things, so it's kind of have to take it back. Yeah, you can definitely change it out. But yeah, you can definitely change it out. And on Android, if you want the native wheel, you can specify. I think none. You'll specify any wheel in the UI.
No, I thought it was.
Oh, that's right. Native wheel unless you specify something. Yeah.
So both of them should have something like the native wheel. That's where you specify another image, and then I'll show you.
But it's a pro only feature. Yeah. But it's a pro only feature. Yeah. Pro to do it.
So.
Alright, we got anything else?
Oh yeah, I had a question. I almost forgot. It's like, you know, Google Games is integration for that coming. Like basically like the game center for Android.
They don't have that right on our radar right now. The only thing we have currently in the pipeline is to do Google in-app purchase. And then we'll start looking at the problem with all these is every single one of these And I understand Google Play is kind of like the game center for Android. But the problem you keep running into is all these different network game ecosystems are all running different APIs, different languages, programming languages, so they become very time-consuming to implement. So we've kind of had to pick and choose what makes both business sense and what makes sense to users.
It's kind of the idea is we're mostly wanting to concentrate on a lot of performance updates we're working on and some of the short-term features that are high priorities. But the main reason we got Amazon instead of Google Play first for Game Circle is because we're doing a cross push with Amazon, and they helped us. They helped us get there. They made it worth it for us to get there. So Google Play is kind of on the back burner because Google is beating down our door saying, "Hey, we need to do it." And there are a few other features we know that the users want first. So.
I got a question for you.
With the graphics overhaul, will it lower the amount of memory an image uses?
Yeah, we're planning to do that. Yeah, so basically, we'll probably have to get diagrams where they show this. It's kind of really technical how we do this. But the idea is that we'll take your image and try to make it as small as possible in memory. There's a couple ways we'll do that. One way is we'll try to find duplicate pixels in, I think, 64 by 64 squares on your texture. So if your texture primarily can be created by just tiling one or two 64 by 64 squares, we'll cut that out of your texture and just take the small 64 by 64 squares. And you can see up to 90% memory saving on your image when we do this. And we're planning to do this during publishing time, so that will actually save you on disk as well. That's one way we're going to do it. The other way is we'll be smarter about what's going to be in memory and what's not, and so we'll evict things that you don't use and try not to load everything that you don't need. So yeah, we're trying to balance it. We're trying to balance it out as best we can. That's one reason why we switched to a proprietary format, is because that gives us more flexibility in how we access your images and how we load them and store the memory.
Another quick question for you.
Actually.
I noticed as well when you put an image in there that's, let's say, 2048 pixels by 2048, it comes out to like 8 megabytes on the gameslad viewer. But if there's even like a remote bit of transparency in that image, and you put that image in there, it becomes 16 megabytes. It actually doubles that image for the memory. Is that like a bug, or is that normal?
So you gotta realize PNGs are compressed on disk. So what happens when you load a PNG is that PNGs use the same zip format, or use the zip format to compress the data. So OpenGL has no idea how to render a PNG. It has no concept of a PNG. So what we have to do is uncompress it to the most raw format it can be, which means that every color channel is usually 8 bits. So if you have alpha, that means you have RGB and alpha. So you're adding another 8 bits with alpha. There is a concept in graphics using compressed textures, but in 2D games they look terrible. So in memory, anything you have compressed on disk becomes uncompressed in memory. So if you want to find out how much your image is in memory, you're going to take pixels, height them with the pixels, times each other, times, depending if you're RGB or alpha, it'll be 8 bits per color channel. So if you're using RGB, it'll be 3 times 8. If you're using alpha, it'll be 4 times 8, and you take that number times the rows, your pixel column.
It might just seem to double, and there's some other stuff going on, but yeah, it really should only increase by 25%.
Yeah.
All right, sounds good.
I have a question. Do you know anything about...
Whoever said I have a question first, and then whoever in the background after.
I have a question.
No, someone else said I have a question first.
I have a question.
That was me. That was me.
Right.
Okay.
Whoever said it, that was me. Why don't we let that person go first, then we'll have the person in the background. Go ahead.
Do you know anything about iOS 8 support?
So iOS 8 is for So iOS beta support, we haven't even got a chance to get it on device yet, so I have absolutely no clue if it runs yet. As far as I know, I think it will run. I haven't seen anything that would preclude it from running, but like I said, iOS 8 was only released like a couple days ago, so I haven't had a chance to even shop it on device yet.
Ooh, I'm running my game on it right now. It seems to work fine.
Is it running? Okay. Yay!
I should test mine soon.
Alright, next person that has a question.
Yes, there's a bug report, CS270, about images, the displaying of images, and on non-Retina devices, which look quite terrible, but even the Retina devices aren't that good. Is that all going to be taken care of when you do this upgrade?
Oh, 1 second. Hey, Ken, why don't you unscreen share yourself here?
1 second, we gotta go.
Oh, 1 second, we gotta go look up on that. I unfortunately don't have all these numbers memorized, though. I don't have my laptop with me. So just 1 second.
So I have a feeling I know what the bug is.
I just refreshed myself. Okay, alright.
I'm having trouble. So I'm having trouble looking up the bug because, of course, the network decided to go walk. If you can give a quick summary of the issue, I think I might know what's going on.
I was developing a game that's got some buttons in it, and there's a border around the button. When you bring the image up on a non-Retina device, the edges are quite rough. It seems to cut the bottom 1 or 2 pixels off the image, also off the right-hand side of the image. And the colour gets washed out around the edge of that, the border of the button. When this image is then put in a Retina device, they look a lot better, but you can still faintly see the washed out colour around the edge of the button. It's not displaying right. It seems to be a bug in the whole system.
So the two questions I would ask, or the question I would ask is, are you enabling Retina, are you enabling resolution independence for this project?
It doesn't matter whether it is or isn't. I use 2 times images, so whatever the active size, I use an image twice the size. And whether I enable it or disable it doesn't make any difference. And they've actually got it in the system. They looked at it quite a bit, and they've come back and they've listed it as a bug. And I was just wondering where it was at.
Yeah, I think I have to grab. I don't have the bug in front of me. This is one of the reasons why I can't wait to get the public database, so I can give you guys access to that. It's probably that best guess. It's probably on the queue of our graphics programmer. I think I remember that bug, and I think I signed it over to him. But I don't know the status of it right now. He's going through a whole bunch of graphics bugs. Like I said, he's reworking the entire rendering system. So I would assume if it's in his plate, it will get worked out. But like I said, we're doing a pretty big overhaul, so I'm not sure the exact time frame. When that's going to get fixed. But feel free if you feel like that, you know, feel free to open our support ticket if you ever hear anything from us in a while, and I'll get with you tomorrow and find out where that is. Status-wise.
Okay.
Thanks. So the only thing
I can think of real quick that might help you is, can you make sure that your image is easily divisible by 2, like the dimensions are easily divisible by 2, because I'm not certain of this, but it sounds like because it happens on both Retina and non-Retina, it's probably something to do with the way what happens when the image is cut. And so my guess is it's blurry because it's trying to hit on a pixel border.
Yeah, you could have a problem where you're in a half pixel situation. So that might be a good thing to try, is to make sure it's by power 2. But also make sure that you're not using any PNG optimizers that stuff the alpha in a weird place.
Yeah, I've done all that. Yeah, I've done all that, and I've been through it quite a bit, and it worked up, I think, until nightly build 250 or something. And after that, it started to display poorly. So it was a bug that was introduced on GameSalad's end. Everything else worked fine until that point. And I've been over the images many times, and they've actually come back to me and said, it is a bug, and they're going to fix it. I don't have it from me.
Yeah, I don't have it from me. I'm assuming it's probably in the other graphics program where it's displayed. Like I said, he's doing some major rework right now in the way we render and load images. So we're trying to put an iPhone out pretty soon that has all the graphical stuff in there, and we can probably check in there. But like I said, I don't know the stats off the top of my head. I don't have my computer in front of me for that one.
That's okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's it works out.
Any other questions?
I had a quick question. Does stretch like work? I think it was on the last one. I don't remember the answer to this, but does stretch work on like any size device? Like, say there's like a new iPhone size screen, will automatically stretch, I guess, for it.
Yep, that's the stretch score.
Yep, that's the stretch score. It's a matter no matter what the size of the device, it will try to fit your game to that aspect ratio.
However, if it's a
weird aspect ratio for to start with, you may get distortion.
Just keep that in mind.
So just keep that in mind.
Are you guys incorporating metal, by the way, into your gameslad?
So we looked at it.
Both the graphics guy and I looked at metal, and as it stands now, there's a couple things I don't like about metal, and there's a couple things I do like about metal. I don't like the fact that it's already in Objective-C, which makes it kind of a little frustrating to integrate into graphics like pipelines. But metal is really geared towards more of a 3D engine. We looked at our overhead, and we're nowhere near hitting the ball. Our bottlenecks are not the overhead of OpenGL. So if we implemented metal, you wouldn't see any difference right now. We're not that kind of performance yet.
We may look at it down the road.
We may look at it down the road as we put more and more graphics features in, and if it becomes a situation where that is a road we take, we'll take it. But right now, we're not going to waste developer resources on it because it's just not going to get us anything.
It'll also make everyone's lives harder if we support metal, then the Android support the Android device. The Android build will be a little different because they don't have a metal, and so then we have twice as much work for everyone to do.
Yeah, proprietary
systems are not really helpful for us. They're
Yeah.
multi-platform.
Yeah,
They
definitely.
make life harder.
They make life harder.
So similar to the case like
So
Swift.
similar to the case like Swift,
like
another issue where like that.
Unless you run iOS or Mac.
Unless you run iOS or Mac only thing, it's one of those languages which is not going to help.
Unless you open it up.
Yeah.
I think I'm good.
Coming up on
It's coming up on 9 o'clock for us, so unless there are more pressing questions, I think it's going to be time to start wrapping up.
Good.
Last call for any other questions?
Last call for any other questions?
I added just one quick question. Like, when do you expect? I see. What was it called? When is the new 12.0 coming? 12. Like, do you have like a date? You think when it's coming?
No, so we're planning to do an
11.1, which will do some small tweaks and fixes to. We'll fix some
code
code bugs,
and
you'll fix, like, for example, the viewer stretch support for Mac. Most of our energy on Crater is going to shift to Windows for at least the next month or so.
Oh, I think with the next Mac release, assuming it's got everything that's currently on the nightly, the new send row and send attribute to URL may be in there as well.
For the most part, the next Mac release will be a small hot fix to just fix some outstanding issues with 11. We're going to switch to Windows and try to get Windows. We're going to get Windows 10.5 out, hopefully in the next week or two, which will fix all the saving problems that people are having, and then we'll get feature parity with 11. Then we'll come back and put out 12.
So you're looking at least a couple months.
So you're looking at least a couple months before 12 comes out. Yeah.
But if anyone out there is interested,
in the Windows version of Creator, the work on that to bring it up to parity is actually going very well. So I think you'll be pleased when that.
Does it work on Windows 8 or is it just 7?
No, 7, 8.
Potentially, at least in theory, it should work on Vista as well, if anyone still has that for some reason.
Not XP though.
We will be dropping support for XP.
XP. Like, are you guys planning, like, are you guys just support, like, Windows, you think, till the end, or is it kind of like a temporary thing?
I think it's going to be, the next major upgrade to Creator will be multi-platform. So it will actually be the same UI for Windows and Mac, but that's like a year out at least. Until we get to the unified Creator, we'll be supporting the second Windows Creator, and we're going to try to keep them a lot closer in parity, the Mac and the Windows version, than we have been doing this past year.
One last little question. Is it not going to be until Unified Creator that we see things like just snapping and grids and sort of basic layout tools?
It depends. We're going to have to kind of evaluate that as we go, depending on how soon the cross-platform creator comes out. We've talked about things for small tweaks in the current creator, but I'm not really sure which ones make the most sense. It's really going to kind of be a timetable issue.
Yeah, great.
Any other questions?
Any other questions?
All right, well, thank you, everyone,
for showing up, and we'll see you next one.
Thanks very much.
Take care, guys.
Thanks very much, guys. Thank you.
How to do this? I just close it because it's
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Hopefully, save the.